Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got spinning around in front of me today is one of the plastic T45 armor sets from Mephiston Games for Fallout Wasteland Warfare. Now this fella I've actually trimmed a couple of the lugs while assembling him, and instead of building him for the tabletop game, I've gone ahead and I fancied painting something a little bit different. So he's here representing my old Fallout 3 character, who always ran around with the Commando and Gunslinger perks. So even though on the table this fella wouldn't likely be carrying both these weapons at once, it's just there so that he reminds me of my old RPG character. Now the method for this is actually very simple, and all of the paints will be listed in the description, same as always. So without any further mucking around, let's get started. So once you have assembled your miniature, however it is you're going to do that, first step is to prime him. Now we're doing a predominantly black miniature, so I've sprayed him here with matte black from the Army Painter, but any black primer will do. I say it sometimes you can use XYZ, here black. It honestly does not matter one jot. What we'll do then is I've got here black grey from VALLEJO. Reason being, this gives us a little bit more visual interest to our armor than it just being purely black. Now this is going to look quite light going on, and we are going to cover pretty much everything, certainly all of the armor. You can also use German grey here, although that will be very slightly blue when compared to black grey. This is more of a true flat grey. All the same, nice stiff bristled brush, doesn't matter terribly what brand you're using. Just get into all of the recesses, and we're going to make this look a little more interesting than flat black. When that dries, you'll see that it darkens down quite a bit, and we've got kind of an anthracite grey going. That's a real nice black. What I'm going to do now is actually I have Iron Hand steel, and there's a few little metallic details which I'm going to paint in now, because it doesn't matter terribly much if we're a little bit messy with them. So the lamp covers on his helmet, these are a pretty good spot for this. And the hoses on the sides there. If you do go over and you hit some of the black you've already done, don't worry about that yet. We are going to bring that black back as part of another stage later, so you can do your tidy up then. Now these T45s are based off of the Fallout 4 model rather than the Fallout 3. So you'll see on the back, a couple of the pipes work slightly differently. Don't worry too much about that. What we'll move on to now is the red. Now, I haven't found any specific information on what the markings here mean. So we're going to make it up. Using Mephiston Red here, what I'm going to do is that classic big red section on the side of the chest plate. And same as always, I've got just a little bit of water in my paint to help it flow smoothly. So you'll see this covers actually quite well. And when it comes to markings on the rest of the armor, there's another red stripe down the center of the chest, and so on. This is where you can really go to town personalizing your dude. I am just going to splatter on a little bit of red in a few places. If it's a little bit patchy towards the edges of where I'm doing it, I'm not too fussed because I've got plans for that in a minute. So, now that'll take a little bit of doing because you're probably going to need to apply a second coat over most of the areas that you apply that to. You'll see in some areas I simply haven't followed the lines of the armor at all, and in some I have. I've tried to emulate the textures from Fallout 3. We'll see how this pans out. What I am going to do now, though, is rough it up a little bit. So what I have is we're going to go back to the black grey, and I have the scraggliest, most awful brush in my collection. I'm going to dab most of this off on a bit of kitchen towel to the side here, and then very carefully start just jabbing at corners and areas where I want the paint to be roughed up and start sort of coming away. So you're going to end up in quite a few places essentially painting some areas back in that grey. But however you want to do it, this is a really easy way of roughing up those red edges. So up here on his shoulder is probably a good spot to show you what I'm doing. Just start close to the edge and start jabbing at it until you catch the very edge of the color and start pushing it in with that gray. Then you've got a nice munted up red edge. Now it's not always fun ruining all the work that you've just done, but I think it fits the aesthetic, and particularly on the back of his legs there, that's going to work really well. Before we go on to the next stage of his armor, we're actually going to black in his guns. What I'm going to use for this is German Grey. This is that blue-black that I mentioned earlier, but you can just as easily use black for this. Now once those two have dried, we're going to now give our armor that sort of dusty, sandblasted appearance. What I have is a raggedy old flat-edged brush and some Necron Compound, and it's important when you first start buffing along the edges with this that you've got next to nothing on your brush. You really do not want much of this at all. We're looking to catch all of the edges of the armor, but in some areas, like on its chest here, I'm going to go back over it a couple of times just to emphasize how that would catch in the wind and the wonderful radioactive wasteland. So I'm going to go over all of the armor with this, concentrating on bits where I want it to look a little dustier. And as well, I can also do this to the weapons. Now, when you first brush across the edge there, you're probably going to look and go, oh gosh, that's too much. But trust me, hold your nerve and just work your way around the armor, particularly on flat areas like the forearms or on the backs of his legs. What you can do is you're running out of paint on your brush is just stipple some of those flat areas, and as the bristles splay out, they're going to give you a neat sandblasted effect. Really easy to do, and a lot of fun too. Now what I've got here, this is Mournfang Brown, and there isn't really a right color for what you'd like to do the wood. XV88 is another very good wood color. A couple of coats of this on the rifle. Now there is one last base color to apply, and that is going to be for the undersuit. Those little rubbery bits that you can see. I'm going to use Mechanicus Standard Grey, which is, in truth, quite a lot lighter than you would see in-game or on the textures. Honestly, I just want to use something which will be visible against everything else that we've done. Remember that we are painting a miniature, and we're not slavishly adhering to the correct color scheme. Now, our entire miniature is going to get a bath in dark tone from the Army Painter. Now here you could instead use Nuln Oil if that's what you've got, but it's not going to be quite as intense a shade. So I'm going to make sure that I am working it into all of the recesses. And we are going, like I said, over everything. So, once this is applied, we'll give him a good half an hour, maybe 40 minutes or so to dry, and get a look at what he looks like then. And once it has dried thoroughly, you'll have something that looks like this. Now, dark tone does dry with a little bit of a satin finish to it, which in reality looks quite good, I think, for the armor anyhow. It does make things a little bit difficult to see on camera, however, so what I'm going to do is actually hit him with a matte varnish. Now you can do this as well at home if you prefer a more matte finish. Just pick a varnish that you like and apply that now. You see what I mean about being easier to see? What I'm going to do now, this stage is largely optional, and it is one that I think I mentioned would work a little more simply if you were to apply this red before shading. But what I have is Evil Sunz Scarlet, and instead of painting over the entire red sections, what I'm going to do is just little blips, really, of red. I'm not too fussed if I do catch other bits that I have already painted. Just stick towards the center of your red areas. You can brighten these up a bit, make them look a little more stark. So for example here, on this little crotch plate, what I'm going to do is just lots of little dots. You're almost stippling, sticking towards the center of red bits that you have already done. And there we go, worth, I think, the extra effort at this point. Now speaking of, what I've done here is grab maybe a couple of dots of Skrag Brown and thin it down until it's very much like a shade. What I'm going to do is paint this into some of the recesses where I want it to look like this is more dust than rust. You could use a more orange color, even Mournfang brown if you wanted a really rusty finish to this. But all I'm going to do is just blap some of this on, let it collect in some of the recesses. Anywhere that it looks like a little too much has gone on, you can just dab it away with your finger, and that will actually quite help the look of it. Now personally, I really like how that looks. It is a little difficult to show you on camera. It is quite subtle in reality, but it's a way of adding a little bit of depth and modulation to the black, again, without having to do any extra painting. But the final step that I'm going to take is with some steel. This is a VALLEJO model air color. It's literally just called steel. Any really bright silver color will do here. What I'm going to do is pick out just a few tiny wee scratches and just ding them up with a little of this right at the edges. Anywhere that you hit with this, especially after having applied that dust filter, these scratches are going to look much fresher and more recent. So you can apply as much of this as you like, but I would suggest try not to go crazy with it. Now, once this is done, what I'm going to do is go ahead, pop a base on them, and I will pop the recipe for that in the description. Let's get a look at our power armor once I am all finished here. And so there at last, our Outcast power armor is complete. Now this takes a little bit more work than if you were just to be painting silver power armor, but the end result I think is one which really stands out. It's going to look cool as on the table. So as always, thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who keep me ticking in paints and glue, including my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you so much for your support, folks. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all. And remember, war never changes.